Hey there, we're the Westlaw Pirates and welcome to the show. We're here to share our thoughts on Northwestern athletics and college sports with thoughts and analysis from the visceral to the statistical. We run our tailgate with the red pirate flag flying high above as we give no quarter, especially the fourth. I'm Sam Walter.
I'm John Lacombe.
And I'm Eric Scuzz, 25 points or bust Scousebow.
Yeah, you're not getting that. It's just not happening. Sorry, bud.
Nope, not even close.
Yeah, that's right. We're here to talk about Iowa today. I am eagerly waiting with bated breath what you have to tell us a little bit later, Scuzz. I am not eagerly waiting with bated breath, John. As, you know, Iowa's D is good, I would imagine.
I was going to say, this is going to be like the one where everyone fast forwards through what I have to say just to get to Scuzz as quickly as possible. I don't know. I feel like that's the Iowa MO. It is pretty friggin' hilarious how last year at this time we were like, well, this Iowa team will be great because this offense can't possibly not get better, and that'll make the defense basically God level. And then what we got was basically the exact same thing as the year before. But Iowa still somehow won all of those games. So, again, it's like for a second year in a row or longer, right? The Iowa defensive numbers were just unreal. And once again, they don't remotely capture how good this Iowa defense was. This team won 10 games in 2023, was an illegal fair catch away from winning 11 games, and their average game score was a 15-15 tie. It just boggles the mind. It is the Big Ten West blaze of glorying as much as it could possibly have blaze of glory. The Iowa defense surrendered 14.8 points and 282 yards a game last year, while Brian Ferentz backed a truck over them again. And for it seems like the millionth time in a row, obviously on Scuzz's side of the ball, there's a big change. But on this side of the ball, again, Iowa loses a bunch of really good guys, and they still look absolutely stacked on defense going into this season. Joe Evans and Logan Lee would be a metric ton for most teams to lose off the defensive front, but if you've been following these previews for years now, I was just stacking dudes on this defensive line right now. Deontay Craig, Yaya Black, Ethan Herkett, Aaron Graves, these are all excellent football players. Now, yeah, maybe there isn't like a stat-stuffing monster here like Iowa's had in some years past, but this is an excellent anti-run unit, and it has maybe the best anti-run unit in the Big Ten, if not the nation, right behind them. So we talked last year about how there was this incoming transfer from Virginia, middle linebacker Nick Jackson, and how he had a solid chance in his first year at Iowa to be first team All Big Ten. Well, Jackson had 110 tackles for a defense that gave up 111 rush yards and 3.1 yards a carry a game. And he wasn't close to being Iowa's best linebacker because Jay Higgins had a ludicrous 171 total tackles. Outside of these two guys, you're only going to find one other linebacker in the conference at this level, and his name is Xander Mueller. Okay? It's Xander Mueller, and it's this pair of guys. Okay? That's as good as it gets. And in Iowa's case, behind these two monsters, you have a ridiculous pair of safeties in Sebastian Castro and Xavier Nwankpa. It is a wealth of riches against any rushing attack. Now, if there's an Achilles heel here, it would theoretically be through the air because Joe Evans provided the majority of Iowa's sacks last year and he's gone. But obviously, you're all probably aware, the huge loss here is Cooper DeJean at corner. That is not a replaceable player. To say nothing, and we'll talk about this later, even though we rarely formally go over it, but we're going to have to talk later about Iowa's specials. And to say nothing about DeJean's contributions on special teams last year for a team that absolutely depended on special teams to generate points. But with all that said, Iowa's going to find solid corners, and they're probably going to find at least one serviceable sack engine to complement this ridiculous run defense that they are going to have. And regardless, it would take a seriously surgical passing game from us to puncture this defense. So, I mean, looking at our game, obviously Brendan Sullivan's going to be on the other sideline now, but you're all Northwestern fans. You've all watched this dance a ton of times. You're all quite familiar with the performance we'll probably need to beat Iowa. It's going to be an ugly, grinding, persistent approach, just like last year, that hopefully allows us to score just enough points to pull out a classic Big Ten West win, even though there is no Big Ten West anymore. So that's the situation with Iowa. They're loaded for bear on defense again. They're stacked with guys. That's my piece. I'm just as interested as everyone else to hear if Iowa finally has answers on the other side of the ball, and that's all scuzz.
John, real quick before we switch to offense, I just want to add like a tidbit on Cooper DeJean in terms of his impact. So, I mean, he only scored 1 TD on punt returns last year, which honestly in my head it was like 5 because I think there were a bunch of times that Iowa there were a bunch of punt blocks that they had, and I think he was involved maybe in a couple of those, from that cornerback position where they'd stop a team and they had a lot of drives that started in their teams, the other team's red zone, right?
But Northwestern fans remember, yes.
Yeah. So Cooper DeJean total last year, 241 punt return yards. The leading receiver for Iowa in 2023 had 299 receiving yards.
That's amazing.
Wow. That's context for you right there.
There are some Iowa 2023 Iowa defying statistical analysis.
All right, so Scuzz, we've been waiting for this for a while. Brian Ferentz, sadly, is no longer roaming the sidelines for Iowa. But I mean, last year we said they couldn't possibly get worse. They did. I mean,
I literally said those words, Sam. I literally said those words.
What do we know?
So legitimately, I thought they had some real opportunity last year, but oh my God, the Ferentz saga last year was really something, and I don't just mean Brian, but his nepotism-loving father. The huge question I have is, will anything change? And I am not just saying that to be a dick, because we Northwestern fans have firsthand relevant experience with a long-tenured conservative head coach outwardly going in a different direction offensively that in actuality, in reality, is no different. Whether the Iowa faithful appreciate it or not, Northwestern fans, us, we are uniquely primed to understand exactly what is happening at Iowa right now. So, like I said, last year, I thought they had some real opportunity to improve on offense. I really thought that they would probably not beat the 25 points a game mandate that got written into Ferentz's contract hilariously the prior season. I didn't think they'd get there, but I also thought they'd get, we thought they would win the West. They did. We thought they would win 10 games. They did. How can you fire the offensive coordinator after that kind of a season? And I guess ultimately he stepped down. They didn't fire him after that season. They fired him in the middle of the season. So but how do you get rid of him? The reality is they were worse. They scored 2 fewer points a game, 15.4 points per game. Less than half of what they scored per game in 2020 and 2018. Just remarkable. But coming into last year, I thought Cade McNamara, they finally got a quarterback. The O-line was starting to look a little bit better. They had some impact talent there. They picked up a transfer receiver from Ohio State. I thought they maybe finally had somebody to take the top off of defenses. They hadn't had anyone in that role since Amir Smith-Marset. I was a little bit worried about McNamara staying healthy. Hysterically, none of those things helped. And while Iowa won the West, like I mentioned, they went to the Big Ten title game, much like a pig to slaughter, I might add. That offense, it was just, if 2 years ago was catastrophic, this was beyond catastrophic. Now, the punt return unit and the defense, as I mentioned, they only scored 2 touchdowns, but obviously impacted field position tremendously. I wish I had a stat to easily do the math. The number of points contributed, quote unquote, like by the defense versus the offense. It's got to be like less than a touchdown. Now, the obvious caveat to all of this is that Cade McNamara was hurt and lost for the season after week 5. And Iowa turned to woefully overmatched Deacon Hill for the rest of the year. Ferentz, much to my surprise, was indeed let go, and now many of the same sunny takes that surround Iowa last year are back again. There was a lot of talk from going into practice, like, oh, they look so much better, they've improved across the board everywhere. Like, the more optimistic takes are talking about how Sullivan is challenging McNamara. Some of the less optimistic takes are pointing out that McNamara does not look great, and that quarterback competition, which should be no contest, is quite tight. So let's sort out fact from fiction, shall we? Honestly, my talk track remains very similar to last year. Most of the same pieces are returning, and the 3 opportunities I pointed out last season are once again true. We'll start with quarterback. Cade returns. Supposedly he's totally healthy, although he does not look it in fall camp. When you dig into it, though, with the exception of touchdown passes, he really didn't perform any better than Deacon Hill last year. 51% complete versus 49. 5.6 versus 4.6 yards per attempt. Sacked 10 times in
Seriously?
5 games.
Wow.
4 of those by Western Michigan. They were on pace for 28 sacks with McNamara. They gave up 32 overall. I said when he transferred from Michigan, like, oh God, I fear for you behind that offensive line.
Right, he's not the getaway kind of guy.
No, not at all. The opposite, in fact. Both McNamara and Hill had a 3.3% pick rate. So the scores look better before his injury, but here's a deep cut. In McNamara's 5 starts, the offense scored 20 or more points, only, drumroll please, once. Want to know who put up clearly better numbers than either Cade or Deacon Hill?
Brendan Sullivan.
Spencer Petras.
Oh, yeah.
The prior year. With a worse O-line, worse receivers, and a worse running game. And here's where I wanted to make an extremely funny joke about Petras actually being on Iowa's team last year and not playing, but the truth is he was rehabbing his shoulder all fall and he wasn't available. So, c'est la vie. But now, given we've seen Cade perform just fine when he was at Michigan, and you can argue that he played the tougher opponents last year, 2 of the 5 games he played in were Iowa State and Penn State. There is still some room for optimism, but dude, like the tail of the tape is not a ringing endorsement, and when you see him struggling in fall ball already this season, like, yikes alert. On the plus side, almost all of Iowa's weapons return this year. They do lose the top 2 receivers. That includes tight end Eric All, who also transferred from Michigan along with Cade. But they retain the high potential Caleb Brown, who transferred over from Ohio State, and Luke Lachey. Now, I'm not really sold on anything else here, but if Brown and Lachey can step up for Cade, that's a big positive. They just need someone to emerge as a consistent threat as a receiver. I mean, so last year, I already joked about it, right? Eric All led the team with 299 yards. Nico Rangiani, number 2, 255. Caleb Brown is the returning lead receiver with 215 yards, and he was the 3rd best guy on the team last year. It's preposterous how few yards they put up last season. They went down from 160 yards per game in 22. They went down to 119 last year passing. Now, the rushing yards increased by about 20, but still, like, hoofta. In my opinion, though, let me hit running backs. Running backs are super solid. Everybody's back. LaShawn Williams, Caleb Johnson, they're your typical really good Iowa running backs. They have size, they have speed, they have power. Like, they're going to run into people and knock them down. The problem is if there's no passing attack, no threat of a passing attack, you can stop these guys and you can tackle them because this is the most one-dimensional offense in history. Now it all comes down to the O-line. Last year, they had some incoming depth, and I thought they looked a little bit more promising, albeit still underweight, which is this really weird feature I've been calling out for years on Iowa now. I think 3 seasons plus. I guess technically they improved. 38 sacks down to 32. 3.3 yards per carry, up from 2.9. It didn't look great, though. Now, this year, if ever Iowa is going to, get back to good under Kirk Ferentz, this seems like the pieces are coming together. Maybe they can do some damage. They have 4 returning starters, 4 seniors and a junior is the projected first unit. They're much more tenured than they've been the last 3 or 4 years. And for the first time since 2018, their 2 deep is averaging over 300 pounds. This has been this weird-ass problem the last few years.
I was going to say.
It's like the starters averaged under 300 pounds in 21 and 22. And guess what? They gave up over 30 sacks in each of those years for the first time since 2016. Now, lighter weight offensive linemen are not a bad thing in and of themselves. In fact, many of these guys have gone on to play in the NFL. But Iowa is and has been a cram the ball down your throat running team forever. And this approach just doesn't work. Less than 3.5 yards per carry each of the last 3 seasons, while putting offensive linemen in the NFL. Now this year, the starters average 307 and the 2 deep is 305. It's the best looking O-line on paper they've had since before COVID. And they don't have the first round NFL pedigree tackles they had like back in the day. Think Tristan Wirfs and Alaric Jackson. Like those guys really powered the offensive lines back in the late teens. But I don't think they're out of the woods, but my point is this is the best shot of the offensive line working in a long time. And if you compound that with Brian Ferentz misusing his players, poorly developing, poorly coaching. Remember, he was O-line coach before he was offensive coordinator, right? So we'll see how that all plays out. But let me ask this question: what if I'm wrong? What if it wasn't the O-line? What if it wasn't the offensive coordinator? What if, and just hear me out, it was the head coach holding the offense back?
Well, we don't know anything about that.
Do I have to pick one in that situation?
Successful old school head coaches can hire dynamic offensive coordinators all they want. Les Miles did it. Jim Harbaugh did it. Pat Fitzgerald did it. If they don't open up the philosophy and the identity of the team to match that dynamic offensive coordinator, it is the same old story. Saban hiring Kiffin and actually freeing him up to run a modern new offense is the perfect counterexample. I don't know that Ferentz is capable of it. But here's the kicker. He has made a hire that at best is a head scratcher. Could it work? Maybe. Well, let's just call me skeptical for now. Tim Lester comes in to coach this offense with exactly 1/2 of a season of experience as a college offensive coordinator. Now, Lester's most promising resume bit is that he was the head coach of Western Michigan for 6 seasons following P.J. Fleck. Western Michigan's offense was very, very, very good during that time, close to 40 points a game good. But it's pretty clear to me that the real architect of that was offensive coordinator Jake Moreland, who left for the NFL in 2021, whereupon Western Michigan conveniently declined 10 points a game in scoring over the next 2 seasons, and Lester was subsequently fired. Lester also spent a couple of years as a quarterbacks coach in college. He coached David Blau in his worst season of 4 at Purdue in 2016. He was at Syracuse in 2013 and 14 under Scott Schaefer, where the offense and the quarterback were not good. He was elevated to offensive coordinator the last half of 2014 and then let go. That's his 1/2 season of experience as a college offensive coordinator. He's got a bunch of success in high school and then that gig at Western Michigan, which was really good for 4 years and then not. So in light of all this, I'd like to ask, how are you guys feeling about the Iowa offense this year?
I mean, that just sounds like a classic, Kirk Ferentz being he's a leader of men. I just know a lot of head coaching experience. I've met him, good guy. And he's going to lead men on offense for my football team. Yeah, I don't know. Guys, you've done yeoman's work to try to sell our listeners on Iowa somehow making an improvement on the offensive line. I've just heard you talk about real offensive lines many times in previews prior to this point, and it didn't sound like this. I see nothing here. I I mean,
it's the returning starters. It's Nick DeJong. It's you've got some pedigree. You've got some experience, and like they're big once again, and maybe that's enough with a competent quarterback and a decent pair of running backs, and not Brian Ferentz calling the plays and telling the players what to do. Maybe that's all it takes for Iowa to be like, because again, the offense can be like borderline horrible, and this team still wins 10 games.
Yeah,
but it could also look like horrific, and without Cooper, maybe that 10-4 from last year is actually 8-5. I don't know. I like full stop. I still think they're going to win 9 or 10 games this year, but it could be it could again be very entertaining to pay attention when Iowa has the football.
I just sit here listening to you talk and just realizing that when Ferentz does retire, Pat Fitzgerald is absolutely taking over, and Iowa's going to look exactly the same.
Oh my god! Oh my god! That would really be something.
Sammy, normally I know you would transition into the schedule at this point, but I kind of alluded to it earlier. In this one particular case, we should talk for a second about Iowa's special teams. So Scuzz mentioned it earlier when he talked about Cooper DeJean, but it is worth mentioning because it absolutely, and Scuzz talked about, played into Iowa winning as many football games as they won last year. Iowa's special teams were incredible last year. You can look at it on a season-long basis, and you can look at it within the context of just our game, right? DeJean was, I think, 12th in the nation in punt return yards for, as Scuzz pointed out, a team that had no other way to get yards moving the ball down the field. So, he was, as Scuzz pointed out, his punt return yards basically were on par with Iowa's leading receiver. But Torrey Taylor, their punter, was number 4 in the nation in punt average and was drafted in the NFL high for a punter. And that punt average, number 4 in the nation, is notable because he punted the ball so many more times than any other player in the country. He had 900 more punt yards than any other player in the country, okay? And then think within the context of our game. Iowa blocked a punt, and they won on a 52-yard field goal from Drew Stevens, okay? This team had such elite special teams that it almost functioned like this bonus that allowed to paper over. And then the question becomes, how sustainable is that? Taylor's gone. Stevens is back. He was kind of up and down. You could argue that Wrigley game, he was cresting for them when he hit that field goal. But they don't have DeJean, and they don't have the guy who was pretty clearly the best punter in the nation by a mile last year. So those are going to be big losses too. So when you factor in whatever's going on the offensive side of the ball, keep in mind that they had specials as a bonus appendage last year, and they're not going to have a lot of that this year.
I guess the one other thing we should probably talk about is Brendan Sullivan, who I didn't mean to omit his name from my offensive rundown. I just didn't think really he'd sniff the field, and it based on fall camp, maybe he will. I don't know. I guess what I want to point out, and this is not a shot at Brendan, it's just he's not a dynamic passer. He's not known for his ability to read the field and manipulate defenses with his eyes, etc. He's a dual threat guy that can create some mismatches and cause some problems, certainly. I guess a little bit to I forget which one you guys made the point about the offensive line not feeling that special, etc. Compare this team to 2022 Northwestern. Good running backs, a wide receiver, knowing that Bryce Chris was hurt. We had Malik Washington. An O-line with some pieces, but, nothing to write home about. A bad offensive coordinator, and then, Brendan Sullivan kind of being the lone bright spot before he got hurt. That team averaged 13.8 yards per game. 13.8 points per game.
Right. He was, he gritted it through.
Yeah. And could he be, a functional, now the defense that year was abysmal. So do they win a lot more games if the defense is good? Like Brendan Sullivan could come in for Cade, could relieve Cade, could beat out Cade, and this offense could be functional. They're still going to be scoring in the mid-teens to high teens points per game. It's a bad offense, and all of the chips are on the defensive side. That's just what this team is looking at.
If you or a loved one is seriously injured by someone else's negligence, hire Kent Simpson of the Simpson Law Group. After over a decade prosecuting murder cases in Chicago, Simpson opened his own firm focused on wrongful death and personal injury cases. He specializes in car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and other transportation accidents, as well as construction accidents, medical negligence, slip and falls, product liability, and more. Millions recovered for clients. No fee unless he wins. The Simpson Law Group. Compassion, empathy, and vigorous advocacy. Go to simpsonlawgroup.com or call 312-332-2107 for a free consultation. And go Cats. So let's go through the schedule real quick, and then we'll kind of put them in globally in a nutshell there. They open up the season at home against Illinois State and Iowa State and Troy. That's their non-conference schedule. They travel to Minnesota. They get a bye week. They're at Ohio State. They're home for Washington. They go to Michigan State. They're home for Northwestern, home for Wisconsin. They travel to UCLA, followed by a bye. Then they're at Maryland, and then home for Nebraska.
Talk about a narrow channel. There's one really hard game, one pretty hard game, one rivalry game, and then I think they're demonstrably better just based on that defense than every other team on here. Us included.
That's a fascinating way to look at it, Scuzz, because I was just looking through thinking, I feel like in this new Big Ten era, we've previewed a lot of teams lately where I'm like, damn, this schedule sucks. Damn, this schedule sucks.
Iowa's.
No. Right. Iowa's is kind of but framing it the way you just put it, I'm scrolling through now and being there is literally one game on their schedule where Iowa's defense won't be the best unit in the game. And that's Ohio State.
Ohio State. Yep.
Every other game, Iowa's defense will be the best unit on either side of the ball that steps onto the field, which is crazy. And you're right. It's their offense might still be a train wreck. Their special teams might still drop off. But by the standards of this new Big Ten, this isn't that hard of a schedule. Yeah. Especially we talked Washington's got warts, Wisconsin's got warts, right?
If Dylan Raiola is awesome, they probably lose to Nebraska last week of the year, I think, because I think that defense is good enough to shut them down.
Mm-hmm. And he's not a freshman anymore at that point. That's the last game of the season.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got the Iowa State El Asico, which is always crazy.
Right.
I can't see them being in jeopardy at Minnesota.
No, that's the thing.
Michigan State.
We talked about. Right, we talked about Iowa's offense could be an absolute train wreck. Minnesota's whole thing is running on the ground with Darius Taylor, which they won't be able to do against Iowa.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't and that's the thing. It's as hard as ever to peg this stupid football team. I just can't. It's there.
Well, I actually think in some ways they're much easier than other teams. So the ceiling's 11. I don't think they're winning at the shoe. But
it is.
They could win every one of those other games.
The
floor is 8. They have it's they're almost guaranteed a really good season, and there's a legitimate shot they could play Oregon or Ohio State in the Big Ten championship at the end of the season with playing one of 3 phases, 1.5 of 3 phases, because their specials will still be good, but not quite what they were.
Right. If I look on here, just looking at this list of teams, you're totally right. Again, say whatever you want about Iowa's offense. I don't know what earthly way Illinois State, Iowa State, Troy, Minnesota, Michigan State, UCLA, and Maryland score points against this football team. I have no idea.
Put Washington in that category. Put probably put Wisconsin in that category.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe put us in that category.
Yeah. I mean,
I hate to say it, you probably put us
probably.
in that category. I mean, we've had really a lot of hard time scoring points against this defense for multiple years now. But
right. I mean, it's maybe the best linebacker core in the country, behind an unbelievably good defensive line. It's in the running. I mean, they're going to be top 10 in the nation group of safeties. I mean, like Michigan State, I don't know how they score a point in that game. Like, I don't like, and there are a bunch of teams in that profile. So, I mean, again, it's watch, rinse, repeat, and I think a lot of people are right. I mean, are going to be negative on Iowa for everything that we have that Scuzz has amply covered for 3-4 years now, and I totally get that. But
I mean, I know Northwestern faithful love to hate on Iowa, and like I will say, as much troubles we've had scoring on them, we have played them tough the last, well, I'll say 3 of the last 4 years. But so will we play them tough on October 26th? Absolutely, we will. It's at Iowa. That's really hard. What I perceive as our strength, speed and misdirection in a running game, is going to be swallowed up by this defense, assuming they play sound and don't have major injuries, etc. And that's just that's unfortunate. But so I think we're all just going to have to suffer another year where Iowa, goes most of the distance. For what it's worth, get your licks in when they have the football, because they're going to be god awful.
yeah, I mean, and again, like the schedule, you look at the offenses in the conference that could puncture this defense. Oregon, not playing them. USC, not playing them. Michigan, not playing them. And then I don't lump Penn State in that.
Not playing them.
And those they're running again. When you line it up like that by the standards of what some of these other teams are dealing with, this is a pretty cake schedule that Iowa has to be able to take this defense in. So I don't know. Yeah, Scuzz, I'm with you. 8 or 9 seems good to be. 8 or 9 with that god awful offense seems right in the realm of possibility for me.
It's 10 for me. I don't see how they lose other than Ohio State and Nebraska. I hate to say it.
It's great. It's crazy. It's going to be
sign Ferentz up for year 27.
Yeah, it's going to be look away, children. But I totally agree. That there are just too many teams that are light years below what this defense is going to be on their schedule.
Yeah. I'll say this. I think you have better odds of pulling off Tim Lester's mask and finding Brian Ferentz than you do with this team losing more than 4 games.
After week 2 or 3, we all realized that Tim Lester looks suspiciously like Brian Ferentz wearing a mustache and glasses.
The old Bobby Valentine movie.
Yeah.
I would have gotten away with it too.
Anything else to mention before we get out of here?
Just I hate this team so much. And,
I hate them too. I will say though, and I mean, nothing but love for what Brendan Sullivan accomplished with this team. And you know what? If they're gonna win a bunch of games, let them do it with Brendan Sullivan under center. That guy bled a lot in purple, literally and figuratively. And if they're gonna get wins, at least let Brendan Sullivan chalk a couple of them up.
Right,
just
exactly.
not against us.
Exactly.
Yeah, amen.
So on that note, we'll go ahead and leave it there for tonight. Head to our website, westlawpirates.com, where you can leave comments and questions. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Westlaw Pirates, and email the show, westlawpirates@gmail.com. Tune in next time as we give our visceral and statistical views on Northwestern athletics. Look for us in the west lot of Ryan Field flying the red pirate flag, because we give no quarter, especially the fourth. For John Lacombe and Eric Scousby and Sam Walter, thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.